Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this very important discussion. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to World Animal Justice for organizing this insightful webinar and for inviting me to share my expertise on a topic that is both deeply significant and urgent, and that is wildlife trafficking. Of course, a special word of appreciation goes to Sabine, the founder of this remarkable organization. The work you're leading and the vision you're striving to achieve are truly inspiring, and it's an honor to contribute to this platform today. I'm thrilled to be here, as you may hear, and I look forward to delving into this critical issue with you all. So let's get started. The transnational trade in wildlife has long been part of human history. However, the unprecedented scale of its growth in the 20th century and the resulting mass decline of numerous species have raised urgent concerns about biodiversity conservation. This expansion, driven by the interconnectivity of global markets and a surge in demand of wild species, has significantly intensified international trade and elevated the perceived values of these species. This growing scale of the trade in wild species quickly necessitated the creation of a dedicated convention, leading to the adoption of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, namely the CITES, in 1973. So the CITES is an international agreement between states aimed at ensuring that international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of the species to which they belong. Within the framework established by the CITES system, there are 3 levels of protection for species considered threatened by international trade. So you have the Appendix 1 that offers the highest level of protection, listing species that are endangered and for which international trade for commercial purposes is prohibited. Appendix 2 includes species whose commercial trade could potentially threaten their biological status, as well as species that resemble those protected under the Convention. And finally, Appendix 3 represents a voluntary approach by states parties to include species they protect and for which they believe international cooperation will better serve their conservation goals. It should be noted that the CITES is a system of it all. It has also established an entire institutional and specific system, but we will not elaborate further on here. So while CITES provides a critical regulatory framework for managing international trade in endangered species, the legal trade itself has faced significant challenges in keeping pace with the escalating global demand, paving the way for the rise of wildlife trafficking. Indeed, the legal wildlife trade, constrained by conservation principles, environmental regulations, and economic frameworks, has struggled to meet burgeoning demand. This unmet demand has created a fertile ground for the proliferation of wildlife trafficking, which thrives on its adaptability and high profitability. This illicit trade, for example, in rhinoceroses' horns, for instance, demonstrates the historic economic allure, with prices surpassing those of cocaine and gold, reaching like 50,000 or 70,000 per kilometer. The broader financial scale of wildlife trafficking is estimated at up to 23 billion annually, making it the 3rd largest illegal trade worldwide after narcotics and weapons. The lucrative financial incentives have drawn the involvement of transnational criminal organizations, solidifying its recognition by the United Nations as a form of transnational organized crime when it operates beyond opportunistic ventures. Corruption and weak enforcement mechanisms further exacerbate the issue, enabling traffickers to operate with impunity. Additionally, the inherently adaptable and clandestine nature of wildlife trafficking allows it to exploit regulatory loopholes and evade detection across international borders, thereby cementing its status as a pervasive and deeply entrenched global phenomenon. Beyond its roles as a lucrative illicit enterprise, wildlife trafficking generates a myriad of parallel challenges and consequences. Economically, it threatens legal industries operating alongside it, evades government taxation, like a 2019 World Bank report actually estimated that governments lose around between 7 or 12 billion per year in potential fiscal revenues from illegal logging, fishing, and overall wildlife trade activities. And this undermines the development of local communities. Additionally, public health concerns arise from the uncontrolled introduction of wild species into certain territories. And furthermore, illegal wildlife trade poses significant threats to international security and political stability. However, as this discussion focuses specifically on wildlife trafficking as a wildlife crime, this analysis will concentrate on its ecological implication. So some scientists now consider humanity to be in the midst of the sixth mass extinction, with species disappearing at a rate 100 times faster than the natural extinction rate. In 2019, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services estimated that 1 million animal and plant species are at risk of extinction. Wildlife trafficking significantly contributes to this ecological decline. Indeed, currently regarded as the second leading cause of species extinction after habitat loss, illegal wildlife trade poses a severe threat to the survival of global biodiversity. It is, for example, estimated that 3 rhinoceroses are killed daily due to wildlife trafficking. Around 55 elephants are poached every single day. Regarding big cats, global tiger population have plummeted by 97% by localized extinction occurring in various regions. These large-scale poaching activities not only devastate species populations, but also jeopardize their future sustainability, especially when breeding-age individuals or large numbers of pregnant females are killed. Furthermore, the declining number of individuals within a species can lead to inbreeding, which significantly reduces the survival capacity of future generations. The decline of top predators, also such as leopards or sharks, due to the illegal trade, has further irreversible effects on ecosystems where these species play crucial regulatory roles. And additionally, once high-value species in the illegal trade are depleted, traffickers often target alternative, similar species to maintain the supply. And so, for example, lions are now being heavily targeted to replace tiger bones, which have become scarcer in the wild for the Southeast Asia market primarily. So this places additional pressure on already fragile ecosystem, potentially driving these secondary species toward endangerment and accelerating the collapse of interconnected ecological networks. So as a wildlife crime, wildlife trafficking thus constitutes a direct violation of laws designed to safeguard biodiversity, such as the CITES and national wildlife protection statutes. And beyond breaching regulation, the illegal activity undermines the integrity of ecosystems, exploits vulnerable populations, and erodes the foundational principles of justice. The criminality of wildlife trafficking thus lies not only in its covert operation and circumvention of legal frameworks, but also in its destructive impact on global biodiversity and the ethical obligation to protect sentient beings and their habitats. Today, wildlife trafficking remains a widespread crime of immense magnitude. The latest UNODC report underscores the persistent and pressing challenge of wildlife trafficking on a global scale, highlighting the imperative for sustained efforts to combat this illicit trade. Its assessment unveils the profound reach of wildlife trafficking, as evidenced by the seizure of 3,250 out of the 4,000 species listed within the CITES appendices across 162 countries and territories between 2015 and 2021. Several factors contribute to explaining the magnitude and persistence of wildlife trafficking. Among these, alongside the rampant issue of corruption, the lack of deterrent effects of criminal sanctions in certain states or countries, the fragmentation of the current multilateral framework, and some loopholes in the CITES provisions stands out. Notably, as offenders typically weigh the immediate risks and benefits of committing a crime, the concept of deterrence appears crucial in crime prevention. However, many states suffer from lax legislation regarding wildlife trafficking, giving free rein to traffickers who, given the value of a products they trade and the leniency of the sanction they face, see this trafficking as a high-value, low-risk system that does not intimidate them. Moreover, the global landscape of legislation exhibits a stark diversity, with stringent laws often clashing with lax regulation. And this dissonance creates a porous international framework, presenting a significant challenge for effective international enforcement and coordination in combating wildlife trafficking. Indeed, this lack of harmonization between state norms has given rise to the diversion of illegal trade flows to transit centers and criminal havens. Faced with stringent legislation in certain regions, traffickers simply reroute their operation to areas with less enforcement, exploiting regulatory loopholes and law enforcement vulnerabilities. And so, for example, beginning approximately in 2018, a string of legal actions aimed at elephant ivory traffickers in East Africa seems to have led illegal traders to change their strategy, opting instead to export ivory from a different region. Furthermore, existing loopholes within CITES provision exacerbate the opportunities for laundering illegally harvested species. For example, tourists engaged in sport or so-called canned hunting often return with trophies for personal use, yet these items sometimes end up in the black market, contributing to the illegal trade. A significant challenge in combating wildlife trafficking is also, in my opinion, posed by Article 7, paragraph 4 of CITES, which permits the commercialization of Appendix 1 species under specific conditions for captive breeding. This provision undermines the efficacy of wildlife protection, as the breeding practices often fail to account for the economic and physiological realities of the animals involved. Consequently, there is a reliance on wild populations to sustain these activities, further intensifying the pressure on endangered species and distorting the legitimacy of trade flows. I addressed this concern in a paper entitled "A Loophole in Article 7 of CITES, a case against Annex 1 species breeding," that has been published in the Journal of International Wildlife Law and Policy last year. And so these practices thus not only place additional strain on wild population, but also distort the authenticity of commercial trade, ultimately fueling demand that legal markets cannot satisfy. And so what can we do? Addressing these challenges requires bold action and international collaboration. A unified legal framework with stronger enforcement mechanisms, standardized penalties, and enhanced monitoring systems is essential. With regard to the need to define dissuasive criminal sanction and create harmony between them on the international scene so as to create a solid common front against the wildlife trafficking, alternatives to a revision of CITES have been apprehended. And it's true that CITES is actually not been designed to tackle wildlife trafficking. It has been designed to regulate wildlife trade. So in that regard, parties of the United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime should establish sanctions to wildlife trafficking in the light of the definition of serious crime provided by the Convention, and that is to say, a maximum deprivation of liberty of at least 4 years or a more serious penalty. Another strategic approach, strongly advocated by various organizations, is the formal adoption of the fourth protocol under the UNTOC. This protocol would provide a clear and standardized definition of wildlife trafficking, accompanied by consistent penalties, thereby promoting alignment of national strategies and strengthening international cooperation. This proposal was notably re-emphasized by attending NGOs during the 12th session of the UNTOC in Vienna last October, an event I had the honor to attend as a WAJ delegate. In parallel to the adoption of complementary legal instruments, a reinforcement of the compliance of the most lax states by means of reminders or even sanctions, like trade restrictions or an inability to participate in decision-making at the CITES Conference of Parties, for example, seem to be a method, admittedly strict but decisive given the magnitude of the problem. Also, the integration of advanced technologies, such as artificial intelligence, can enhance tracking and traceability within supply chains. Additionally, fostering partnerships between governments, NGOs, and local communities is vital to strengthen conservation efforts and promote sustainable livelihoods. Finally, targeted capacity building initiatives for law enforcement and judiciary personnel, coupled with increased public awareness, can bolster efforts to dismantle trafficking networks. So in conclusion, wildlife trafficking continues to pose an immense and evolving threat to global biodiversity ecosystems and the rule of law. Despite the foundational framework of CITES, regulatory gaps and inconsistencies in international enforcement have enabled the illicit trade to flourish, exacerbating ecological degradation and undermining efforts to protect endangered species. By recognizing wildlife trafficking not just as an illegal trade, but as a direct assault on the integrity of wildlife and their habitats, we can begin to confront it with the urgency and coordination it requires. It is only through decisive, united action that we can shift wildlife trafficking from an illicit enterprise to a globally acknowledged crime, ensuring the protection of the world's most vulnerable species for generations to come. Thank you.